Hello dear chess enthusiasts and welcome back to our exciting journey through the world of chess. This video is episode 1 of our new series Grandmasters vs Amateurs. In this series I want to cover amateurs facing grandmasters, and as you might imagine, it's not always the favorite or the grandmaster who is winning. So with no further delay, let's jump into our first game of this series and witness a very interesting opening battle between Christian Bauer and his young opponent, who is an amateur. As already mentioned, the Grandmaster Christian Bauer playing the white pieces plays the queen's pawn opening with d4 and then knight f3. And black cannot determine yet what white is actually going to do. So he plays e6. And now a very standard move of dealing these positions would be playing c4. And then might follow b6, g3 and bishop to a6, hitting this pawn, or also bishop to b7. The difference is bishop b7 is the old main line, while bishop a6 tends to be more fashionable these days. So now let's go back and we will see in a minute why these differences which I've shown you actually matter. So here white decides to go for g3. And the thing is that white is actually trying to trick black with the move order and force him into the old main line. So black has a variety of choices, and if you check the database you will see that most amateurs prefer playing b6, transposing into the old Queen's Indian main line, probably. So white is not forced to play c4, but most likely going to do it. But let's go back for one moment and see what black's alternatives are. So of course black could play d5, but actually there is a move which enjoys a lot of popularity among very strong players, and this is the move b5. So b5 looks strange, is not possible usually because there is already a pawn on c4, but in this case it is, because there is no pawn on c4 and there is no control over this b5 square by white yet. And as you can see, black is expanding on the queen side and also opening this b7 square for his bishop. So usually the game continues bishop g2, bishop b7, castles, and black plays c5 later on, challenging the center of white, and black is generally going to play on the queen side here. But let's go back. This is just to show you what you might play if your opponent decides to go for this setup, or which black could happily play, but get a very complicated position. So there are winning chances for both sides, and very complicated as mentioned. But instead black opts for b6, and white does not go c4 because then bishop a6 would be possible. But instead he goes bishop to g2, pardon me. So now putting pressure against the rook, and black is forced to go bishop to b7. And here why forced? Because bishop a6 is not hitting anything. This is the move we just discussed a few minutes ago. And the difference is that there was a c pawn on c4. So black was actually attacking something. Here he is not. And a way of handling this by white is to play knight e5. So now the rook is attacked. And after c6, for example, there is castles, d5, and now just rook e1 and playing without c4. So for example bishop e7 and knight to c3, and finally push the pawn to e4. This is why the knight is on c3 and the rook is on e1, and also the bishop here is having a good time, because the center is probably going to be a little bit more open later. Bishop b7 might follow, and this just proves that black's setup is a little bit bad with bishop a6. But let's go back. So instead black plays bishop to b7. And this is the possible position transposing into the old main line, and white indeed, Christian Bauer plays c4. So this is the old main line of the Queen's Indian. And possible moves here are bishop e7, bishop b4 check, or c5. But instead, black plays d5. And this might be a little bit too early, because usually there's a critical decision which white has to make here, or black actually allows, because as you can see, there is this diagonal which goes into both directions, and there's this diagonal and it goes back. And the thing is, white could just open it with c takes d5 and e takes d5. And now we have this diagonal, the bishop is already on b7, and this might cause some issues. So usually white takes in a lot of lines on d5 when the bishop moves to b7 just to open up the diagonal against c8 here. But okay, let's go back to the game. So d5 was played and white decided not to take yet, but to play knight to c3. And now black gets the chance to come back into the game with d takes c4. And white can regain the pawn by queen a4 check and later capturing on c4. But the position is roughly equal. So the position is okay compared to the game. In the game, knight b d7 was played. And now white decides to take on d5. And since the knight is already on c3, black is not worried about knight takes d5, because earlier on there would be a possible e4. But here it's not working because of knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, and bishop takes on e4. So let's go back. White just castles, because this thing which we have just mentioned is not working. And black becomes very active now, but actually he should have played something like bishop to e7 or knight takes c3 and keep the position a little bit quiet, yeah? Not to open it too much, because as you can see, the king is still in the center. So black decides to play c5, and white has a calm little move which is very good. After knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, there is the sneaky rook e1. And this is what white had already seen when he played knight takes d5 in this position. So let's go back. Now the bishop is on d5, and after rook e1, black takes on d4. And now the question is how to take this pawn on d4 back. And there is a natural looking way. This this knight takes d4, then comes bishop takes g2, king takes g2, and bishop c5, and black is okay. But if you take a closer look at this position, you will see that this bishop is protecting g7, but g7 isn't attacked, so the bishop could move any time in, let's say, for example, the knight takes d4 variation. But if the queen takes on d4, there is pressure against g7, and black has issues, because bishop to e7, maybe just take, bishop here, and white's queen just gets out. White won a pawn, black is probably not going to be able to castle anytime soon, and the king is not safe in the center, so very bad position. Material down and an unsafe king. So instead, because black wants to avoid this, black plays knight to f6, blocking this attack, but it's still not over yet, because the king, as you can see, is still in the center. And this bishop on f8 is blocking black's possibility to castle. So white plays dynamically, knight to e5, and black tries to exchange on g2. Now the queen is hanging, so white has no time to take the bishop, because otherwise the queen is gone, so this is no good. So instead, white plays the very strong in-between move, queen a4 check. And there is no productive way of retreating anything to put in between. Yeah, so the position is just bad. For example, bishop to c6, queen takes c6, check. Knight to d7, then might follow something like rook to d8. And now there is a lot of pressure on this knight. So this is not good, and black should find something different. So black plays knight d7 immediately, not losing time. And now the king takes on g2. And now black, if he would go bishop to e7, white would play rook d1. So black has an issue here, because there are just too many attackers and only 2 defenders. 3 attackers, 2 defenders. So black is going to lose material in this variation. So he decided to play f6 instead and get rid of this knight on e5, which was annoying because it was attacking the d7 knight, and this knight is pinned, as you can see, from an earlier stage due to the queen on a4. So knight drops back to f3. But what did white achieve here? If you take a look at this pawn structure, black cannot be happy. Also the development, very bad. However, if black somehow manages to get the pawn on e6 to e5 and castle, then the position might be okay. But he's not going to achieve this, and we will see why. So black plays bishop to d6, trying to develop the bishop, but here just follows rook to d1. And just imagine the bishop went here, then again rook d1 with great issues still. So black has a very hard time here, and he cannot castle. So bishop d6, rook d1 instead, and now comes queen c7. Black might have thought that he found a way to defend everything, but it's actually not working because of bishop e3. e3 might be an okay square for the bishop, probably not great, but the main aim of white is to allow rook a to c1. So rook d8, defending this knight a 3rd time, but this is not enough because of rook a c1. Now follows queen to b8. You want to protect this attacked bishop on d6, and now white just continues the attack with rook to c6. And now if black just dropped back with the bishop e7, white would take on e6, and the position is completely lost. Let's say queen b7, bishop f4, queen f7, king f7, queen c4, sorry. So now this position is completely lost because rook c8 can be answered with rook c6, discovered check. Not very pleasant. So let's go back. Black, desperate, plays b5, and white just goes g4, hitting this pawn, hitting this pawn. So the position is very bad. And also this is still twice attacked but only once defended. So black should solve this somehow. Black plays knight to b6, so the rook defends it with the queen, so the rook defends it a 2nd time, but it's not enough because bishop takes b5, a takes b5, and queen takes e6 check. And now the pawns are going to fall. If white wish to go after the pawns, But after bishop e7, white just avoids the trade of rooks, of course, and plays rook dc1, and has very strong threats now along the 7th rank, and black is completely lost. Black tried rook f8, and after rook to c8, black played queen to b7, and after rook 1 to c7, black decided to resign because there's no good defense against queen takes e7 checkmate. As always, I hope you liked the video and enjoyed the game, and if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section, leave a like or subscribe the channel. See you in the next video.